Y'all, Wizard101 may be about to release an extremely unpopular change. We need to talk about this. The patch notes for the upcoming update are already out, and one thing that has a ton of people angry is this part right here. They're changing the way shields are valued, and that's going to affect a bunch of shield gambits in this game. Now, if you don't know what a shield gambit is, basically it's a spell that either does extra value or extra damage based on having shields on yourself, and they've been a topic of conversation before because the setup for these is extremely easy. If I wanted to get 4 shields in order to do extra damage with this Dumoni, I have not 1, but 2 different spells that for 0 pips gives me 3 different shields to put on. It's a 0 pip setup. The counters are at least 3 pips, if not 5 to 6 when we're talking about Spellamented Minnow, Spellamented Elephant. It was so easy to set these up that they nerfed them. It used to be a × 2 multiplier, but right now in Live Realm, as you can tell, it's more of a 1.7 times multiplier. And now, according to these patch notes, it's going to be closer to a 1.9 times multiplier. These are going to be the new shield gambits, and I think y'all can already tell that some of these are dropping a serious hit on your opponent. Looking at Jhin doing over 2k, I can't help but wonder why in the world are they doing this? Looking at the other spells that are getting buffed, maybe this is like a way to make Ice a little bit more competitive. Obviously, Ice having a good Ice Scion or a better Colossus or Frost Beetle, these are probably good things for Ice. And while that's great and all, I would argue that Death and Myth absolutely do not need a buff of this magnitude. And normally I'd like to at least see where they're coming from when it comes to some of these changes, but the patch notes don't do that. All it says is that shields have a new value. Why is there a new value? Are they aware that this is going to buff spells that probably don't need a buff? What is the new value? I feel like there's so many questions that are just not answered that I don't even know where they're coming from, and all I can see as a player is them buffing spells that are obnoxious as hell to go against. The one silver lining, I guess, is that they're nerfing the multiplier on Blade and Trap Gambit. If you guys aren't aware, there are people that just literally go into queue and just spam blades or traps, and that's all they do. And then they use the spell that gambits those blades or traps to do extra damage. It's extremely, extremely boring to go against, and also pretty OP in its own right. So I guess that is a good nerf, because I, again, don't know how much the nerf is. Could be a bad nerf if they overdo it. But I can't help but think that every time you go against an Ice, Death, or Myth, it's just going to be Alien Spirit Shield Simulator, and there's nothing you can really do about it as a normal player. I think part of the issue is the fact that right now the counters when someone shields like crazy are just not good enough, especially if you're not of the school the counters from, right? Like maybe a Myth can pack a bunch of regular minnows and TC minnows that clear shields. Maybe they could deal with this, and maybe a Fire can use, I don't know, Dark Surge and Empowers to get a bunch of pips and spam the hell out of Elephant. But every other school will just have to use Minotaur or Fire damage and Elephant and do very little damage against someone that's just spamming 0 pip shield. I feel like for shield gambits to be even more rewarding than they are now, the counters have to be way lower pips. It actually doesn't make sense why something that is so easy to set up for 0 pips has no counters that are actually meaningful, that you don't have to wait more than 2 rounds for. Y'all know what I'm saying, right? Even Minnow, the cheapest, like, good, you know, shield counter outside of, like, you know, Jin's defense and all of those, like, 3 pip ones that don't do anything really. You still have to wait 3 rounds for this on any school. So with counters costing way more pips than, like, way more pips than it costs to actually set up the gambit, I just don't really get what they're doing with this one. And I'm not the only one who feels this way. I think a lot of people feel this way. I think there are some schools that are horrific this meta, Fire and Storm especially, like they're low resist schools. And I would argue both of these schools, the second they fall behind even a little bit against someone that's shield spamming, they auto lose because they're gonna get one shot by a gambit while being defended against. My suggestion, if the intention of this is to buff Ice, which actually does kind of need it, then I think they should focus on the actual spells outside of the gambits in order to get them. They're already buffing Colossus. I don't know what that's gonna mean. I mean, Colossus, it's kind of good already. Pretty damn good. Like, it does a little bit of damage, gambits shields on yourself, and adds traps. I assume these traps are going to get more powerful. That's actually a meaningful Ice buff. Frost Beetle's another one. Them buffing this when it already turns a shield into a 65% set shield based on your opponent's school, that's a very, very powerful mechanic. Are we going to be seeing an 80% shield? Maybe. That'd be kind of cool. So when buffs like this exist, I don't see why they can't just finick around with the shield gambit value on things that don't do damage and rather do utility, instead of just buffing spells that are extremely, extremely hard to counter. If this is genuinely going to get like a 1.9 times multiplier, what I at least hope then happens is that the counters are way cheaper. I feel like Elephant and Minnow either need to become literally just 1 pip lower each at least, or they need to start affecting more than 3 shields, because otherwise you're never going to catch up with someone whose only goal is just to spam a bunch of shields and do this. This is about a one-shot half the schools in queue right now. That's awful. That's like not a price that anybody wants to pay just to buff ice. And by the way, I feel like the part of the conversation that might get lost in this if we get too spell focused, ice is some hot ass because of a lot of reasons. It has much less to do with their spells than I think their stats. See, on a death, my lowest accuracy spell is still 80%. I only need to get 20% accuracy, and that lets me use all the extra freedom in my stats to buff up my damage, my resist, all of that. Ice does less damage and also gets less accuracy. They have stat burdens all over the place that their counterparts, Death and Myth, don't really have to deal with this much. So I think Ice's issue has more to do with its damage per pip and its accuracy and how much value the spells itself are given. I don't think it has much to do with the shield gambit valuation, because as you can see, a lot of people are freaking out that even though Ice is getting buffed, it's going to ruin the game for a lot of other schools. The other thing that I have heard thrown around is that maybe they should, like, I don't know, buff the value a little bit on these shields, maybe make them 55 or 60, but instead of 0 pips, make them like 1 pip. I don't really think that would do much. I'm just gonna be honest. I feel like, yes, making the setup of a gambit that's literally free to set up harder is probably a good thing in the long run, but I think all it's gonna do is have people, like, you know, empower first and then just spam 1 pip setups. I really don't think that's gonna affect things. I think the problem really is resting in the actual just amount that the multiplier is and the number of pips the counters are. All in all, y'all, I was very, very excited for this update until they said this. I actually am really excited for the Nightmare gear. I'm actually excited for Blade and Trap Gambits to be nerfed a little bit because they genuinely do, in my opinion, are OP. And they're even affecting stat caps, so you can't just, like, you know, be a better Storm on a death and then just queue PvP doing that. That's all happening in a couple of days. But for so many good changes to be fully eclipsed by the eyes of many by the buff of the Shield Gambit, I think that suggests that Shield Gambits are literally ridiculous, and they're actually good where they are right now. I really hope they reconsider the buff. I feel like, I mean, at least on schools that are decent, like, you know, Balance, maybe Death and Myth, you could probably deal with the Shield Gambit. If you're like a low res, like low HP type of school, Shield Gambits have just become a new level of broken. Like a Fire, a Storm, probably even Life. They're all just going to be fully affected negatively by this in a way they don't need to be. This is just my hot take. If y'all didn't know about this, at least I hope now y'all know about, you know, the upcoming patch notes, all the spell changes that are coming. But this definitely seemed to be the one that got a lot of people angry, and I kind of see why. So I wanted to make a video on it. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you guys think the Shield Gambits should be doing. And what do you guys feel about the other changes? Do you guys think they, you know, the Trap and Blade Gambit changes are gonna, and the cosplay changes are just gonna make up for this? Or do you guys think the PvP is gonna be awful? Let me know. As always, drop a like if you enjoyed, leave a sub if you're new, and if somebody hasn't told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. Stay awesome. See y'all soon. And yeah.